We are recording to the cloud. David, take it away, please.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the fifth in a series of seminars, Zoom seminars being done, produced by our Sustainability Advisory Committee. I'm David Shuey. I'm the Vice Chair of the Board of Supervisors for East Goshen Township. And tonight we are going to address all of the common questions, maybe some misconceptions about electric vehicles, and we probably all have them in our future. So I'm looking forward to learning some things. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Brian Hutchinson, who will be our moderator for tonight's webinar.
Thank you, David. Welcome again to everyone. My name is Brian Hutchinson, and again, I'm a member of the East Goshen Sustainability Advisory Committee. Tonight, we're pleased to present Morgan Folger from the Environment America and the Clean Cars Campaign Director, who will be discussing why electric vehicles are important to solving climate change, best practices for making public EV chargers easy to use, options for purchasing electric vehicles and chargers. After Morgan talks, we will hear briefly from Mary McCloskey, a member of the East Goshen Sustainability Advisory Committee, and Nicole Valentine. Both are residents of East Goshen and owners of electric vehicles or EVs. If during the seminar you wish to pose a question, please email me at my personal email address. It should be on the chat, but for those of you who are calling in, if you would like to pose a question, that email address is B as in boy, G as in girl, Hutchinson, HUTCHINSON @comcast.net. Tonight's subject is a high priority for the East Goshen and the Westchester area. The Cabinet's report, available on the Township's website, that was produced for East Goshen and the other townships within the Westchester Council of Governments, identified the transportation sector as a high emitter of greenhouse gas emissions. Electric vehicles are one of the many solutions to this problem, and our speaker tonight will elaborate on the subject and solutions. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Morgan Folger.
Thank you, Brian. I'm really glad to be speaking with everyone tonight. So again, I'm Morgan Folger. I am the Clean Cars Campaign Director at Environment America. Environment America is a national federation of environmental groups. We have 29 state-based affiliates across the country, including Penn Environment here in Pennsylvania. And I currently am based in Philadelphia, and I live in Ardmore, Pennsylvania. So I'm not going to the office right now, so Ardmore is currently my home base. And our main mission is to harness our nation's innovation and technology to make sure that we can provide clean air, clean water, and open spaces for everyone to enjoy, and a livable climate so that we can continue to provide a future that is livable for other generations. So next slide. And if you haven't been paying attention to the news, it's clear that climate change is ravaging communities across the country already. It's no longer something that's far off into the future and something for someone else to deal with. It's happening to us, and it's happening right now. The wildfires that are burning out in the West right now are tragic, taking lives and destroying many homes and landscapes, and they're fueled by climate change. There's more storms forming off the Atlantic coast than in recent history. We're already in the Latin naming of storms with beta formation, which is really early to have such intense hurricane events that are forming off our coast. And here in Pennsylvania, while we might not be impacted as directly by wildfires or by some of the hurricanes that have torn through our Gulf Coast, we'll continue to see more impacts of climate change, like sunny day flooding, hotter and more intense days during the summers, and the spread of invasive species through our beautiful state. And so there's lots of reasons why we need to be addressing global warming. And one of the best ways that we can do that is by tackling the pollution from transportation. Next slide. So transportation nationwide is climate enemy number one. In 2017, the transportation sector in our country emitted 29% of the total greenhouse gas emissions. And in Pennsylvania, transportation is a close second to electricity, which accounts for the majority of emissions in the state at about 35%. And transportation produces 29% here in Pennsylvania. So in Pennsylvania, we are still a mostly fossil fuel power generated state. We rely a lot on fracked natural gas and also on coal and other dirty energy sources. So our electricity sector isn't as clean as the rest of the country, but transportation pollution continues to grow every year, and it will continue to be an important sector to focus on here in our state. And then in addition to contributing to climate change, tailpipe pollution also threatens our health. It increases the risk of premature death, asthma attacks, heart disease, and other harmful health impacts. Next slide. So the only way we can really effectively address global warming is changing the way we get around. And we need big, ambitious goals to transform our transportation system and the means to achieve them. So thankfully, we have a roadmap to help us solve this problem. We have all the solutions at our fingertips. So first, we need to totally shift toward electric cars for our passenger cars and trucks, and make sure that we can get ourselves off of fossil fuel powered cars. We also can electrify other types of transportation. So one example is electric school buses and transit buses, which are also a major contributor to global warming pollution. And these buses are also the ones that drive through our communities. They carry our kids to school. And the diesel pollution has really harmful health impacts as well on those communities. And the last thing is just reducing the amount that we drive in the first place will make it a lot easier to achieve goals of fully electrifying our transportation sector if there's less cars and less trucks and other vehicles to electrify. So if we increase the amount that we're walking and biking and taking public transportation, then we can reduce the amount of pollution from our transportation sector. So all of these different clean transportation solutions are already available and ready to use. Next slide. So I'm going to focus mostly on electric cars and passenger cars. And they definitely have a certain cool factor that makes them really attractive to a lot of people. But for most consumers, there's still barriers to going electric, both real and imagined, that stand in the way of that full transition toward electric transportation. So to reduce pollution from our cars and transition to electric vehicles, we need to eliminate those barriers. So I want to talk about some of those common questions here. So first is the range of electric cars. You may have heard about range anxiety. So people are concerned that an electric car might not be able to take them where they need to go. And in reality, today's electric cars have long enough range to serve the vast majority of the trips that most Americans take. So a 2016 study, for instance, found that a 2013 Nissan Leaf with a range far below most of the electric cars on the market today, since that's about 7 years old, the technology's grown a lot. So that Nissan Leaf could replace about 87% of vehicles driven on any given day without recharging. According to the Federal Highway Administration's National Household Transportation Survey, 75% of the car trips that we make are under 10 miles, and 95% of the trips are less than 30 miles. So the amount that we're driving is not as far as we think it is, and there's plenty of juice in most car batteries in an electric car to get us where we need to go. And for longer trips, as a result of the battery improvements that technology's seen over the past several years, the newest models have ranges upwards of 250 or even 300 miles. So another concern is charging. So this goes along with range anxiety, is if you run out of juice in your battery, will there be a charger available for you? For electric vehicles to become more mainstream, they need to be easy to charge and just as easy as it is to find a gas station. people correctly notice there aren't as many electric car chargers as gas stations currently. And a survey in 2019 found that the majority of consumers considering an electric car purchase believe there were too few charging stations around their home or their work areas. That suggests that there's a lack of a strong charging network across our state that would allow people to feel comfortable finding a place to charge. So the public charging infrastructure isn't meeting the current or future demand, and residents without at-home charging options will need more public charging. So there's a lot that public policy can do to streamline how we charge electric cars and make it more easy and accessible for people to find a place to get some juice. And the good thing is that it is really easy to be able to plug in at home or at your workplace, or even when you go to the grocery store or go to a restaurant. There still are lots of places out there where there are electric car chargers already installed and ready to use. And having those charging stations in public places where you already go spend 20 or 30 minutes getting your groceries, or eating in a restaurant outside now, since we're in the middle of global pandemic, you can go about your regular errands or your regular day and be charging at the same time. So another concern is the cost. So electric cars can be outside the budget of a typical consumer, but there's already more affordable options on the market and more on the way. And part of the image issue, I think, is that Tesla has really been the car that people recognize and associate with electric. And it also is a company that makes a lot of luxury vehicles. And so the everyday consumer isn't going to be able to buy a $100,000 car. But Tesla does make some more inexpensive options, and so do many other car manufacturers. The Nissan Leaf, the Chevy Bolt, and many more affordable mid-size cars are a great way to find an option for you that might not be the expensive one you see your friends driving. Used electric cars can also be a really affordable option. So, a few years ago, there might not have been as many available, but there become more used electric cars on the market as the electric vehicle revolution grows. And the prices continue to come down closer to gas-powered cars. And then in addition to the upfront cost of buying the cars, electric cars can save you money on fueling and maintenance. So electric cars have a lot fewer parts. The amount of parts that are in an engine of an internal combustion engine or gas-powered car is hundreds of parts. And when you have an electric car, you don't need all those parts. And so you don't have as many things that break down. And so electric cars are a lot easier to maintain. Mostly you're replacing the brake pads, which also don't get as much wear because of regenerative braking, which is where the car will start to brake and convert that into more power to be able to move the car. And so you'll be able to save on maintenance costs. You won't have to bring your car to the shop as often. And the fueling, using electricity for fuel is a lot cheaper per mile than fueling up at a gas station. And the Department of Energy has found on average, it costs about half as much to fuel an electric car. It's different in different places of the country and depending on where you get your electricity from. And then the other thing is that there's financial incentives available as well. So one is the federal electric vehicle credit of up to $7,500. States have additional rebates, and I'll talk more about funding options a little bit later. And then the last thing is that many of our staunchest environmental advocates are asking, if the car is charged on a dirty energy grid, is it really better for the environment? And yes, it is. So the life cycle emissions of an electric car versus a gas-powered car are significantly less. So manufacturing an electric car may be a little bit more intensive, but there's savings in emissions as soon as you start driving. Batteries are much more efficient at converting power into actual movement than a typical internal combustion engine. So an internal combustion engine, when you're running your car, loses about 80% of the energy to heat. So you're wasting a lot of energy that's just burned off and not actually used to move the car forward. But for an electric car and a battery, it's much more efficient at moving the car. So you use less energy overall to actually move the vehicle. And then the other factor that makes electric vehicles better is that they get cleaner over time. If you get a fossil fuel powered car today, it's going to emit the same amount out of its tailpipe the whole time that you own the car. But an electric car will get cleaner and cleaner as we repower our society with more renewable energy. It doesn't have any tailpipe emissions. And so the more that we can combine solar and wind and renewable energy with electric cars, the cleaner they'll get over time. Next slide. So I also wanted to talk a little bit about what East Goshen can do and what local governments can do to help speed the transition toward electric vehicles. So there are some of these things were in the CADMIS report that the Township and others in the county have put together with ideas about how the county can transition towards 100% renewable energy and to more electric transportation. And so the first is passing EV-ready ordinances. So what that means is essentially it's easier to lay wiring for an electric car charger when you're already building new structures and having new development than it is to go back in and tear something up and install a charger later. So an EV-ready ordinance says that if you're doing new buildings, you also have to create the wiring that could mean you could install an electric car charger in the future. It helps bring down some of the barriers around installing an electric charger in public places and makes it a lot easier to do it in the future. But it also doesn't require a business or apartment complex to install a charger right away if they're not ready to do so. Then educating residents about electric vehicles. So just like we're doing here, a seminar to talk to people in the community about electric cars and their benefits, the more that the town website or other events and the sustainability committee can tell people about electric cars, the easier it will be for residents to make the switch. The town can also install public charging stations. So there are public spaces throughout the town where you can make it easy for people to be able to charge up. It might be that you install some chargers at your local government buildings and give the public the opportunity to use them as well, especially during the nighttime when folks aren't in the office building. Great to have those available for folks. You can also electrify your own fleets. So any vehicles that the county operates, whether they be passenger vehicles, if they're an electric garbage truck, if there's, local volunteer fire stations or the police vehicles, there's all different sorts of vehicles that are owned by government that you can lead the way by going electric first and showing that these vehicles are ready to roll. And then they, in addition to setting a good example, are a good opportunity to have some cost efficiencies as well. So there's been communities that have been revising their fleets and realize that they might not need as many vehicles as they initially had. And so just lessen their fleet size in general based on how employees are actually using the cars. And then there's one example down in Roanoke, Virginia. They actually were looking to replace some of their vehicles with electric cars and went to a used car dealership and found used electric cars so that they could lessen the cost there. So it doesn't have to be just buying a new vehicle either. Other things are promoting mobility. So talked a lot about cars, but the more that we can do to get people out of their cars or give people the option who might not be able to afford a car to get around with electric transportation is great. So electric car sharing programs are a good option, and electric bikes are also great, especially for going up big hills. It can be really helpful to have the electric engine to help you keep moving. And so thinking about other types of electric transportation and opportunities for the community are great. And then there's, outside the typical jurisdiction of a township or a county is to support and encourage the electrification of the other vehicles that come through the community or are based within the community. So Lyft has made some commitments toward electric vehicles. Uber has, but not as bold as Lyft has. And there might be other ride shares in the community where you can work with those companies and figure out how they can have more electric options available. You can work with the local school districts to encourage them to purchase electric school buses, and work with the fleet managers for the school districts on that. For those, there's lots of grants available for electric buses, and there are potential for more federal funding in the future. Same thing for electric transit buses. So SEPTA in the Philadelphia area has already had some electric buses go online and are driving, but certainly not their entire fleet. So if there's any bus routes that come to the community, you talk to SEPTA and encourage them to bring more electric buses and maybe pilot them in your community. And then the last thing is setting goals for the percent of registered electric cars in the community. So in Colorado, there's this program called the Go EV City and County Commitment. And it's essentially similar to the 100% renewable energy commitments that many municipalities have made across the country. And so it's a first of its kind program to encourage similar commitments for transportation. And so those cities and counties that made that commitment are setting goals for how many registered electric cars will be in their communities by certain dates. And that helps incentivize them to be able to provide public charging options and other options to help the members of their community go electric as well. Next slide. So I'm going to talk a little bit about charging. So for most people, if you have a garage or a driveway and a 220 volt plug, which is normally the type of outlet that you would plug your washer or dryer unit into, it's really easy when you get your electric car to also get a, just regular wire plug to plug in, but you can also install a charging station for a couple $1,000s if you get a more slow charger, which is typically known as level 2. If you want to get a faster charger, it might be a little bit more expensive. And that's definitely a great option. But for folks who live in a community that's shared and, or if they have street parking, it's a little bit harder to charge at home. So having public charging available is super essential. We don't all have gas stations in our houses, right? So this is a unique opportunity where you can be able to charge at home and fuel up your car in a way that normally you would have to leave your home and go find a gas station. But being able to find a public charger should be just as easy as finding one of those gas stations. So building on public property is great. Making it easier for residents to install on-street charging can help with some of those issues of if you don't have a driveway readily accessible. And then some of the other issues that come up when you install public chargers are that there's a lot of different charging companies with a lot of different payment schemes and a lot of different memberships, and there isn't necessarily a standardized thing because this is a new industry. So making sure that those chargers work for all different types of electric car owners is really important when you're designing public charging programs. So you want to make sure that they work for different types of plugs because some vehicles have different plugs than others. You want to make sure that you don't have to have a membership for a particular charging station in order to be able to charge. It'd be really annoying if you pulled up your car to plug in and had to sign up for a whole new membership before you could actually plug in and get charged. Having standard fees and pricing that's visible and clear, and having clear signage that delineates that is really important. And then accepting credit cards. So there's some charging companies that require you to download an app and do it through your phone. Much easier if you can just, put your chip into the charger and pay right away the same way you would at a gas station. Increasing visibility and price transparency. So when you drive past a gas station, you see those big signs with how much it costs for regular or diesel. And so you should be able to just as visibly see where the charging stations are. So having good signage is important so people know where to go, and also be able to see the price very clearly. And then lastly is dedicating the places where electric cars are charging to solely electric cars for parking. There's a term in the electric vehicle owner community called getting iced, which is the acronym for internal combustion engine. It's when somebody with a gas-powered car parks in the electric vehicle charging spot. For EV charging to work, you want to be able to park there and actually get charged. And so those spaces should just be for people who own electric cars. Next slide. So lastly, I'll talk a little bit about some of the funding opportunities. So I already mentioned the federal electric vehicle tax credit. So this is a federal tax credit that anyone can take advantage of, and it's up to $7,500 per vehicle. For some cars like plug-in hybrids, you're eligible for a slightly smaller tax credit. And then there are also some vehicles that have already hit their cap. So one of the things Environment America is actually working on is to renew and extend the tax credit so that it can apply to more vehicles, since the electric vehicle market is certainly not as far ahead as it needs to become mainstream. So it has run out for some models like the Tesla models and the Chevy models, because they were the early adopters of selling electric cars. They've now already hit the cap. But for other newer vehicles, like Hyundai has some electric cars they've started offering, Kia has electric cars, those should be available to take advantage of the tax credit. There's also a federal tax credit for installing charging stations. So it's for alternative fuel infrastructure. So it also works for the hydrogen for fuel cell vehicles, which can be expensive. And that can cover up to the full cost of an electric charger. In Pennsylvania, there's specific state level programs for funding. So there's the Pennsylvania Alternative Fuel Infrastructure or Incentive Grant Program, or AFIG. And then also the Driving Pennsylvania Forward program. And so both have created some rebates and incentives for folks in the state to take advantage of. And for the Alternative Fuels Incentive Grant Program, it is one that can help you with the purchase of the vehicle. And then the Driving PA Forward rebates are for the charging stations that are still available to apply. And that works for state municipalities and other local jurisdictions can apply for those rebates. And then there's also some potential initiatives that Pennsylvania is planning to join, hopefully, that could provide more funding options. So these are the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative and the Transportation and Climate Initiative. So the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative is a program that 10 states throughout the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic are participating in to cap pollution from power plants. The polluters are paying, and then that money is going towards clean energy, energy efficiency, and other programs. And if Pennsylvania joins, they'll decide how to disperse the funds and what sorts of projects to put it towards. But in New Jersey, since transportation is the biggest source in our neighbors across the river, they actually are putting a lot of their RGGI funds towards clean transportation projects. So that could be an opportunity for Pennsylvania to help support switching to electric cars. And then the Transportation and Climate Initiative is also a regional program that's 12 states in the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic plus DC. Pennsylvania is considering being a part of it. And that would be an opportunity, again, to reduce pollution from transportation and create funding so that we could invest in the types of clean transportation solutions that'll reduce pollution and make our communities better. So next slide. So that was my presentation, and we will be taking some questions at the end. So if you think of any, make sure to email Brian. And then here is also my email, my Twitter handle, and then a website to learn more about our Destination Zero Carbon campaign, which has some of our big visionary goals for statewide and national pollution reduction in the transportation sector.
Thank you, Morgan. We appreciate you spending all this time with, providing that information for us and for the people who are attending tonight. As Morgan indicated, we're going to hold questions until the end. At this point in our program, we're going to turn to two of the East Goshen residents who have owned electrical vehicles for a while. And that's Mary McCloskey and Nicole Valentine. I guess Mary has her husband there. I guess, Mary, if you want to unmute yourself, we'll start with you. If you could spend a few minutes just telling the participants here, the attendees, what your experience has been with your EV.
Hi, Brian. Thank you for having us. Thank you, Morgan. Your presentation was great. Some really wonderful information. We bought a Tesla, what model?
2.5 S.
Tesla S model 2.5 years ago. And we're really, really happy with it. There's a lot of affordable electric vehicles out there. So you don't have to go with Tesla. But we chose it just because it was easy to use, and they had a lot of information that you can download right there in the vehicle that gives you where you can charge and how many miles left to charge. You can map out your route, and Greg is the primary driver of it, so I'll let him speak a little more.
I bought it because the car is really fast. It's a great performance car, and I've been very happy with the car itself. And I think from a lot of things that people are concerned about range and not being able to get to work and things like that. I mean, I think all the EV cars are certainly have enough range. Like if you run out of gas in your car a lot, I mean, you probably shouldn't have an EV car, but as long as you can like control the gas tank, I mean, it's a great option. I mean, it's really been very easy to have the car.
There's no oil changes. The upkeep is really low, and we've been able to use our electricity is, what do you call that?
It's like a
the renewable
20
energy.
Yeah.
We have all renewable energy through our energy company. So, but we mainly bought it because we felt frustrated that we weren't doing enough to lower our carbon footprint, and we wanted some small thing that we could contribute as citizens. We just didn't know how much stinking fun it would be, because it's a really, really fun car. So I can't say enough about it.
That's great. Nicole, do you want to spend a few minutes and tell us about your experience? And then we'll go on to questions for Morgan and both of you.
Sure. Thanks for having me here. It's a real honor to talk to my neighbors and people in town about this, because it's something I care deeply about. Morgan, thank you for your excellent presentation. Very helpful. And I wanted to point out, I do have a Tesla. I have a Model S 85D, and I've had it for over just about 7 years. I actually ordered it in 2014. My model is a 2015. So when it first arrived, I got lots of strange looks driving it around town. People were like, "What is that?" They stopped and talked to me and asked me about it. So I kind of felt like I was also representing the brand locally for a while, which means I drive very carefully so that everyone thinks Tesla owners are very kind and considerate. I absolutely love the car. I'm a technologist, and I was a Unix programmer, so I've been following the company carefully. When I heard that there was a company that was building a car on a Python and Linux operating system, I thought that would be really neat if there was a car that I could hack myself. Kind of reminded me of my aunts and uncles in the 60s and 70s who would buy a Volkswagen because you could take it apart yourself and fix it. Of course, I do not hack my Tesla, even though I could, because I would no longer be under warranty. I absolutely do love the car for all the reasons that Mary pointed out. I am the primary driver in the household. Pre-pandemic, I was driving at least 60 to 70 miles a day back and forth. And I charge in my garage, usually every 2 days. Now, of course, I don't go too many places at all. My range when I first got the car was 290 miles because this is an older model. Now my range, because you do have battery and degradation over time, now my range is 275, which is really negligible in terms of my lifestyle. I do, again, pre-pandemic, do a lot of travel up and down the Northeast coast. When I first got the car, it was a bit of a learning curve because there was no onboard navigational computer yet. And here's the neat thing about Tesla. The model I bought was so early, but everything that has come out since is like getting a new car and a download in my driveway every night. So every time that there's a major upgrade in the car, as long as it's not hardware, as long as it's software related, I get it, and I get it for free. So it's a lot like having your phone being updated. It just happens overnight in my garage. I wake up, I see what new features I have, and I'm like, great, it's like a new car again. I've had no problems with the car. It's been great. I love the fact that I am not pumping gas because there was often times where I was late because I knew I had to run to a gas station first. Those don't happen anymore. I only spent $300 to have my charging station put in my garage because I hired a local electrician to do it. And it's been super easy. So I'm happy to take any other questions about it. If you want to talk about the tech, I'm a bit of a gearhead, so I can talk about that too.
Well, great. We appreciate your feedback on your EVs. We have a number of questions we want to cover. I guess I just wanted to go back quickly to Morgan. Excuse me. We have a question here from one of the participants tonight. Is there an online site to locate, this probably could also be for the EV owners, is there an online site to locate publicly accessibility charging sites nationwide? Anybody want to tackle that one?
I'll say yes. One of the cool things is now Google has actually integrated the electric vehicle chargers into their Google Maps. So it wasn't a feature a couple years ago, but it's now updated. So you can see, just search for electric charger near me and see all different ones. And it tells you what company is operating it. And then there's also another website people like a lot is called PlugShare. And that's where folks can find it. And then Nicole and Mary, I know you probably also have in the car, it tells you where your chargers are, right?
I'll actually plan the trip for you. If I'm driving like up to Vermont, which I do a lot for teaching, I can just say where I'm headed and it'll show me the charging stations along the way that I should stop, which are always, I mean, people are always worried about that. Like, oh, doesn't it take you so much longer to get somewhere? And I'm like, actually, it's about the same exact time because if you're driving 7 hours, you're going to stop every 2 to 3. To use the ladies' room, get some food. By the time I was finished buying something at the local, mart right next to the charging station or something like that, my car was ready to go again.
So here's a question for the EV owners. After you've both had an EV for a couple years now, what is the most important advice you would tell others who are considering purchasing an EV? Mary or Nicole?
I mean, like I would go back to what I said earlier. It's a good experience, but I mean, if you're a person that like is ready to run out of gas, I mean, you need to plan to where you're going and like what's going to happen tomorrow. And then if you do that, I mean, I think if you're not that type of person, I mean, it's a great experience. I mean, I agree. We've gone to Myrtle Beach from Westchester. It's a 10-hour drive. It's maybe a slightly longer, but not a lot longer. And it's a great experience. I love the car, and I think like if you look at the long-term effects and what you're saving, it's definitely worth it.
Mm-hmm.
No doubt.
Mm-hmm.
Nicole, any comments on that one?
I'd say get involved in the online communities that are dedicated to whatever vehicle you're purchasing. I have made some friends online through the Tesla community. Early on, if you were an early adopter in the community, you actually needed way more help, because if you were planning on driving somewhere, you had to do all the calculations and find out where the superchargers were yourself. So we formed this like online community of people to help each other. And it was great. I mean, I made friends all over the Eastern Seaboard, people who are like, hey, if you need a charge, stop by my garage. I'll just leave it open for you. That obviously isn't the case anymore, as there are superchargers pretty much everywhere you need them. The only place I've been that didn't have a supercharger, I was lucky enough to be staying there a week. So I just pulled out an extension cord and trickle charged while I was there, which means plugging it into a regular wall outlet and having it take, 4 times as long.
Great. Morgan, I want to go back to you and ask a question in regards to, do you have any information about any townships or counties in the Philadelphia region that have purchased electric school buses, and what are their challenges?
Yeah, and so I don't think there are any in the region that have purchased electric school buses quite yet. Like I mentioned earlier, SEPTA operates some electric transit buses in the city, which may also double as some school buses for folks getting around to school. But there is a report that Environment America put out. It's called Electric Buses in America, and it has some case studies of different communities that were early adopters of electric buses. So there's some information on a school district in California and another in Massachusetts. The Massachusetts one might have a little bit more similarities to the climate and experience here in Pennsylvania. And so the exciting thing is that for getting to school, an electric bus is like the perfect type of vehicle to use, because you're not going very far and you're not using it for long stretches of time. So during the middle of the day, while all the kids are actually in school, is when you can recharge the bus and be ready to go back out in the afternoon and pick everyone up. There are also some programs that allow school districts and others to do a pay-as-you-save program. So working with the local utilities, you can actually not pay for the full cost of the electric bus right away, but be able to first get the bus, and then as you're saving on your utility bill because you're not using as much diesel fuel for the buses, you can then pay the utility back for the electric bus over time. So that helps a lot with the budgeting and planning for school districts. So No school buses in Pennsylvania yet, but hopefully soon.
Good. I know that there's a question going back to Mary and Nicole. I know, Mary, your husband, you had indicated that you purchased 100% renewable electricity. So I guess you're powering your car on renewable energy. Nicole, do you do that as well, or do you just use the brown power?
No, right now I'm on brown power. My husband and I are looking into getting a Tesla Powerwall and Tesla shingles for the roof. We really like the look of the product. Tesla's solar panels are not panels, they're actual shingles. So we're investigating how much that'll cost over the long term. When I bought the car, it wasn't cheap. I was one of the early adopters, but the way we worked it out is we looked at a spreadsheet, and it was the same, us buying that car would be the same as if I bought the Volvo, which I was looking at buying in terms of security and safety for the family, and knowing that my daughter would learn how to drive on that car. Tesla had the same safety ratings. So I said, okay. But when I did the math, and sometimes this is what happens, I mean, if you can outlay the cost ahead of time, and of course use the federal and the state, which I think I got $7,500 at the time when I purchased the car from federal and state rebates. But my car is paid off, so I'm no longer paying for the car, and my gas is about $11 to fill a whole tank in terms of electricity, because I do it overnight and the off-peak hours. So now we're looking at what we would gain long-term from having the Tesla power in the
That's
house.
great. That's great. I just got a follow-up question for Mary and Nicole. One of the participants is basically saying there are no spares tires with the Teslas. Have either of you ever had a flat and had to call Tesla Mobile? No for Nicole, and you've had your car for what, 7 years now?
Yeah, it's been 7 years. The only problem I've had with the car was due to my husband. And I would say Pennsylvania roads. He hit a pothole like the size of Lake Geneva in my car about a week after I got it. Not realizing that it was so low profile too. He wasn't used to that. He was used to driving cars that were the higher profile. So he did break the front axle on the car. And one of the really great things also, which nobody talks about when they think about buying a Tesla, is they're not made of steel. They're made of an aluminum alloy. So when you do have a problem with the car, if the car does have a crash or a ding or whatever happens with the car, they actually replace all those parts in the car. So the car's like brand new again. They don't try to rebend the steel back into place and knock out dents. You're actually re-getting those pieces of the car again, and the car is like brand new.
I can second that. Within the first month of having our car, we were rear-ended and sideswiped at the same time by two cars while we were in park or stopped at a light. So we were not moving. And the force was unbelievable, and they couldn't believe that neither of us were injured. And the other cars were more damaged than ours. We did have to take it to a shop that, specializes in parts for Tesla. I forget, but that was a while ago. It came back brand new, no problems.
Well, good. It sounds like 7 years and 2.5 years later, both of you have your original tires.
Yes.
That's better than my car. Let's go back to Morgan for sort of finishing up with some of the questions, because we want to have a few minutes to finalize.
How do we ask questions?
You're supposed to submit a question via the email address on the chat. If you click onto the chat, you'll see the email address. Morgan, just going back to you, in your the fourth slide of your presentation tonight, it showed that the transportation sector was the second largest emitter of total greenhouse gas emissions up until 2017. And it almost looked like electricity was going down and transportation was going up. Again, that slide was for Pennsylvania only, or was that a nationwide graph?
Yeah, so the graph that I had was for the nation. So overall, transportation emissions have been on the rise in our country, and our electricity emissions have gone down. And part of that is because the growth of the renewable energy sector has been so fast and rapid over the past decades. So there's a lot more solar and wind energy online than there was before. So we've made a lot of progress with our electricity grid nationally, but not as much with transportation. And then for Pennsylvania, the graph would look a lot different. Industry would be a much higher contributor. Electricity is still number one, and then transportation also a contender. And part of the reason that transportation emissions continue to be so high is that most gas-powered vehicles are still really inefficient and still run on dirty fuels. The electric vehicle share of all our cars is still pretty small. We also design our communities in a way that requires people to drive a lot and breeds this car dependence. People might not be able to access transit if it exists in their community. It might be poor quality or expensive for folks. And walking or biking can be difficult or unsafe. So it keeps us in our cars that keep polluting. So the more that we can switch to those electric cars, the better. But overall, transportation is going to be, I think, continuing to be on the rise as a sector of emissions. And hopefully in Pennsylvania, we can see a reduction in both transportation emissions and electricity. Hoping we can join the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, which I mentioned, so we can start to reduce pollution from the power plants throughout the state and start tackling the electricity sector in the way that many of our surrounding neighboring states have done.
I think that's all the time we have for questions at this point. I want to thank Nicole and Mary, your husband, for attending tonight. What I'm going to do is I'm going to ask Kip to put up the 3-page PowerPoint slide for the National Drive Electric Week. And for those of you who don't know, this seminar is occurring the night or the day before, or a couple days before the National Drive Electric Week. They're in their 10th year. If you are looking for more information on a national level, you can go to the website listed, or just Google Drive National Electric Week. There are events that are going on throughout the country. I'm not sure if there are any in this area. And Kip, do you want to go to the next slide? So the other thing that consumers and individuals can do is they can go to the Plug in America website, pluginamerica.org, a nonprofit organization that promotes and advocates the use of plug-in cars, trucks, sports utility vehicles, etc. You can go to their website. They have links to other websites that allow you to browse over 51 electric and plug-in hybrid cars, trucks, compare and experience EVs. I checked it out. I am in the market probably in the next year for a new car. It's going to be an electric car or a plug-in. I have currently a Prius. Let's go to the last slide. And the last slide is the Electric Auto Association. If anyone's interested, the Drive Electric National Car Week website has links to all of these 3 organizations. And Morgan, do you want to say some additional information about that organization or the events that are occurring?
Yeah, I'll just say, so National Drive Electric Week, there are, I looked on the website today, I didn't see any in-person events for Pennsylvania, which is probably for the best. So I don't think you can get behind the wheel of an EV during this National Drive Electric Week like you might be able to in previous years. But there are some really cool online events, including some virtual ride-alongs. I saw something called EV speed dating. So yeah, if you go to driveelectricweek.org, you can find some more webinars like this to continue the conversation about electric transportation.
Great, great. So I just want to ask if David, did you want to say any ending
Yeah, Brian,
comments?
I think my video has been disabled, but I would like to say something. Morgan alluded to this in her presentation, but the reason electric vehicles are so important in East Goshen Township is that East Goshen was primarily developed during the 70s as an auto-centric community with housing developments in cul-de-sacs where you have to get in a car and drive out to a main road to go shopping, to visit friends, no sidewalks, we don't have connectivity. And the Paley Pike Trail and the park system trails and things that we're trying to develop are a step in the direction of trying to get us to be a little bit more, a little less dependent on automobiles. And if we are dependent on automobiles, I'm hoping that people start to think about hybrids and plug-ins and electric vehicles. I know that my next car will be an electric vehicle. And I made a step forward last week, and I ordered an electric assist bicycle. So you'll be seeing me on that a lot more in the neighborhood. So I wanted to just thank Morgan and Environment America, a great presentation, and thank the Sustainability Advisory Committee for the work that they've done. This is the fifth in a series of very important webinars that all be available on the Township website. So thank you, committee, and thank you, Morgan.
So I'll just end with, if there are any additional questions that were unanswered tonight, I will make sure that those questions are directed to either the EV participants tonight or to Morgan, and they can try to get your questions answered. I know we have a few more that popped up at the end, and be more than happy to see if we can get those answered. So I want to thank Morgan again for spending the time with us. We appreciate that, and we look forward to future seminars. So with that, I would like to thank everybody for participating, and have a great evening.
Thanks, Brian.
Thank you.
Thank you, Morgan.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
This is excellent.